I guess we'll move on to the next lightning presenter. We will hear from Dr. Sally Merritt, a professor of psychology, but not one of Jada's professors. Dr. Merritt is at Georgia Southwestern State University. So take it away, Dr. Merritt.
Thank you so much. And I just want to say thank you so much to Jada for sharing. I really like to hear from students, and great that she's in psychology also. So it's very applicable to what I am talking about today. So the title of my talk is Research Results and Challenges from a Study on Social Psychology OER Textbook Adoption. So I teach psychology. Social psychology is my area of expertise. So it was very important to me to find textbooks that are relevant, that are really up to date on the research. I had used a traditional paid textbook, which you see with the pink background by Gilovich, Keltner, Chen, and Nesbitt when I was a graduate student at Tulane teaching this course in social psychology. And it's a great textbook. I mean, it has a lot of resources. It has a lot of chapters about how to apply social psychology to the real world and to students' real lived experience. But now that I teach at Georgia Southwestern State University, it was really important for me to find an OER textbook. Over 90% of our students are on scholarship or financial aid. And so this textbook is not affordable. It's typically $70 online and $140 for a hard copy. Some students can get used copies or rent the textbook, but it's got a hefty price tag. So when I started at GSW, I was using this textbook, and I received a grant to transform and use a different textbook. I tried to find a free one for this class. So the data I collected was during 2 different semesters. During the summer of 2023, I was using the paid textbook, and during the fall of 2023, I switched to the free OER textbook. And that one is from the University of Minnesota Library. So they offer it online. And I felt like the content was pretty comparable to the paid text. It doesn't have some of the resources, but I was able to supplement with things that I have kind of in my repository there. So the summer classes are not as big as our fall classes. And so I was only able to collect 7 participants in this survey to get their feedback about how they felt about the textbook during the summer. And then in the fall, I had 22 students participate in the survey. And so I'll be sharing some results with you to try to get some quantitative data about the comparison between these 2 books and how students were using them. So one of the big overarching questions that obviously I want to know is, was it easy to understand? So for the paid textbook that's in pink, students rated it about a 4. And for the OER, it was a 4.55. So this is on a 1 to 7 scale, actually, with 1 being strongly disagree and 7 being strongly agree. So they're actually seeing that the OER book was a little bit easier to understand. So that's always good. This is the question where obviously we see the biggest gap between the responses, and that is that about the cost. So when asking about the cost of the book was an advantage, we're seeing it as a disadvantage for the paid textbook, and more of an advantage with the OER at 4.64. I hate asking this next question, but obviously it's important to know, and this is an anonymous survey, so students were answering pretty honestly, I think. So the question was a little more detailed about, I read the sections assigned in this textbook. And so for the paid textbooks, students responded at about a 4, and then for the OER, we have the 4.4. So, you know, my hope is that if it's free and it's available and it's accessible all the time online, that students at least are going there and reading it. There's always a chance that students don't purchase the book and therefore don't read the book when it is a paid book. The other thing I think that professors and other people looking to adopt OER materials is the concern about whether students are going to be able to navigate the book and how easy it is to use. So a lot of money and resources go into paid textbooks and some of those features that Jada talked about that help professors with their classes. And so I want to make sure that this textbook was still easy to navigate, even though it was free and online. And students were saying indeed it was, giving it like a 4.5 compared to the 4.14 in the paid textbook. Another concern for the students is whether these books are up to date. So a lot of times, you know, with paid textbook, they're constantly updating. The book I showed you for social psychology actually just came out with a new edition last year. And so they're always kind of on top of their game in terms of different viewpoints and making sure the material's up to date. And so the OERs can sometimes be a little out of date and maybe not offer as many viewpoints. So I also wanted to ask this question. And the data was pretty comparable here with the paid textbook. They rated about 4.42 and the OER 4.68. Oops, sorry, I went ahead one. And then real life examples were used. So as I mentioned before, with the paid textbooks, there's several chapters at the end about how you can apply social psychology to different fields or careers, like the medical field and health, or the justice system, being a lawyer. So I did want to see if we could still see some real life examples. That's one of the things I love about psychology, is that students can kind of bring in their own lived experience. And so I wanted to make sure there was enough real life examples used in this OER textbook. And indeed, that's what we're seeing. The paid is being rated at 4.29 and the OER at a 4.59. So that's data from perceptions from students about how they felt about the book and how easy it was to use. But I also gathered data about their grades. And so I had used the paid textbook in the fall of 2022 and the summer of 2023. And so those are the pink bars you see in this graph, where the average final grade is a high 80. And then when I switched to the OER textbook, the final grade average kind of dropped to a low 80. And so it's just something to think about. I don't know if this is maybe just because it's the first time using it, or if that would be the trend. But, you know, perceptions of how good the book is different than whether it's really meeting students' needs in terms of how successful they can be in the class. And so that is one thing that I want to continue to explore and collect data on to make sure that my students can be successful using this OER book. And lastly, I did mention that there was some challenges with this textbook, and the University of Minnesota Libraries has decided to unpublish this textbook, which means they'll no longer host it on their website. At the time that I submitted to this conference, I was exploring whether I was going to use another OER textbook. That one is from a university in Canada, and so it's not ideal because I'd rather have those real life examples be things that are historically happening in the US and can relate closer to my students who are mostly from the US, mostly from the state of Georgia. And so it wasn't ideal. But I also, as a social scientist, was interested in, okay, well, maybe I could go back to this paid textbook for a semester because then I would have the more comparison data. But I really feel that that's not advantageous for my students who, as we heard from Jada, are dealing with many of the things she talked about in terms of budgeting and making sure they have the materials they need to be successful. So when I checked back with the agency where I found out this information about the unpublishing, they are actually going to be hosting this textbook just on a different site. So it looks a little different. It looks a little clunkier than what the University of Minnesota Libraries was doing. But I am planning to use that and sort of gather more data about how students are finding it accessible and how they're using it. So I just want to say thank you for coming to this lightning talk. And I also want to thank Affordable Learning Georgia, who was the grant funding agency that gave me some money to do research on this transformation. So thank you.
Thanks so much, Dr. Merritt. We have a question from Charlene. She wants to know, what were the reasons for the library unpublishing the OER textbook that you had been using?
It's not totally clear to me. There was like a long email about it wasn't up to date, and they I think the last version is like 2015, so it's an older OER textbook. And I'm not really sure why, because I'm not connected to the people that put it out there. But I'm a little nervous that might be something we will see happening more often with other kinds of textbooks that are out there.
Yeah, so often it's like this was one person's passion project and they left, and now it's not, that, so it's just over. That
Right,
happens all the
right.
time, right? I found your data very interesting because I'm the librarian for the College of the Arts, so I work with the film program here at Georgia State, and we pay thousands and thousands of dollars a year for streaming platforms so students can watch films, which they're assigned to watch for class. And even when we provide the streaming for free to them, they still don't watch. So I was very interested in your slide that was about like, I did the reading, and it was like, it was very interesting. I was like, oh, it's not just in the film program where they're not, maybe not doing the work, even when we give them free options. Any other questions for Dr. Merritt? So Marianne says, do you have a low/no cost identifier in the course registration system? And if so, do you think it impacts enrollment in your course?
That's a really good question. We don't have any identifiers that I'm aware of in our registration system. Our university has adopted a intro psych textbook that is OER, and so everybody uses it. There's no cost to students who are taking intro to psych. But I don't think students know that. I often get emails from students saying, like, how do I find out how to buy my book? And I'm like, it's free, it's OER. We do have, so not at the registration point, but once they've like enrolled in the class, then they can see what textbook is assigned. And there is a way that we say that we are using OER and which OER. So I do that for my classes, but sometimes they have to sign up to see that, so they don't see that at the registration side, which I think was the question. And the other part of the question, which I think is interesting, I think it impacts enrollment. So I've other colleagues in my department don't seem to think so, but I was toying with using a different OER for a course, and then I ended up using a paid textbook because that OER turned out not to be what I wanted. And I did see enrollment drop. So I think students are looking at that. So it's important to try to plan and have something that's free if it is at all possible.
Great. Oh, I see another message. Oh, Marianne says thanks because she asked the previous question.
Yes, you're welcome, Marianne.
We do have a thing in our enrollment system, which I'm sure at where you are, they use the same system because all of the USG, and they have a little label that they stick on low or no cost classes. So perhaps you can ask your administration about that.
Yeah, maybe I will. That is actually really cool.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't see it from my end, but sometimes things are different for students and I don't always know what they're seeing. So
Yeah.